Thanks so much for taking the time today, Brett. Really appreciate it. Could you give us sort of an overview of the project in Seneca Falls? It's been kind of in the works for a while. So remind those listening and watching what this is going to be.
Yeah, sure. So this is the historic Huntington Building, which was originally a yeast manufacturing company, eventually became a used car dealership. It's a historic building, and it was in fact named by the Landmark Society as one of the five to revive in our region, one of the most important historic buildings to revive. It had been slated for demolition to create a gas station, but instead we were able to work with the owner and get site control so that we could preserve the building using historic tax credits to create housing. We're going to create 53 units of housing and in fact restore the fourth floor back onto the building, which was a mansard roof at one time. So we're quite excited.
Very cool. So where do things stand right now? Obviously, we're working towards the end of 2022. Where does the project stand at this moment?
Sure. Just a couple weeks ago, we purchased the building and we closed on all the financing necessary. The principal part of that funding is from New York State Homes and Community Renewal that will allow us to create these housing units and ensure that they're affordable going forward. So we are under construction. We're doing our kind of stabilization, demolition, and abatement part of the project.
And a lot of folks will be curious, what does, might be hard to point to an exact timeline, but what is a rough timeline for what you guys are hoping to do with the building over the next year or two?
It's about an 18-month construction schedule. So call it early 2025, right? We will, first part of 2025, we'll start advertising for the availability of the rents or the units.
Excuse me. Very cool. Talk to us a little bit about what home leasing does or how home leasing approaches these types of rental properties, what that will look like, and the who will make up the folks that are ultimately renting these 50-something units.
Sure. So home leasing is a family-owned, very much a mission-oriented company, and we specialize in affordable housing. We really love to do projects that are accomplishing something more than just creating affordable housing, which is a good thing, but we want to have a positive impact on the community. And so what appeals to us about a project like this is we're doing a couple things. First, we're solving this problem of this historic building that's in disrepair and restoring it to, its former historic glory. It'll be a really beautiful building. But also we're providing something that I think the community needs, another 53 residents right along the canal on a major street in Seneca Falls. And we are able to also provide some supportive housing for veterans. So we are partnering with Eagle Star, and Eagle Star Housing provides services to veterans. And 27 of the units will be provided to veterans who will get services from Eagle Star to help them improve the quality of their lives. That was important because we had heard from the community that veterans were an important population that they welcomed to the community.
And in terms of what the last, I believe I remember hearing about this over 2 years ago when this development first popped up. I'm curious, what were some of the challenges that you guys faced, obviously outside of just the pandemic? What were some of the challenges that made this process maybe a little more difficult than some other projects that you guys have taken on?
Yeah, I would say, if the pandemic hadn't happened, this would have been a fairly efficient and straightforward process. In the context of our work is complex and hard to start with. But we got the project funded. It was very well received from New York State Homes and Community Renewal. And it's really important to note that we got a lot of support from the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. That was a big part of the Seneca Falls efforts to revitalize itself. But because the pandemic hit, a few things happened, right? Financial markets changed a lot. So it became, we had to re-find our assumed investors and We're working with Hudson Capital and Chase Bank, and they've been fantastic to work with, but under difficult circumstances because the pandemic caused a lot of chaos in the financial markets. But the other thing that happened, as everybody knows, is inflation hit right at the wrong time, right? So when we had sufficient funding to build the project 2 years ago, right, or a year and a half ago, but the definition of what it costs to build radically changed, and so we had to spend the last 9 months or so working with various funders to see if we could get some additional funding, working with our investors to see that we can get every penny that we can line up, and and we were able to do that, much to the credit of the state agencies, the DRI program, and Homes and Community Renewal. So that was principally what caused the biggest problem that we faced is rising interest rates and increased costs of building.
I was going to ask, obviously not for an exact number, but if you were putting like a rough percentage on it, what would you say the cost of development increased over the last, say, 2 to 3 years for a project like this?
Oh gosh, way more than 20%, 25% probably. Yeah.
Wow. So what is the first visual change, I guess, that folks can expect as you guys are going through the abatement process and demolition and starting to rebuild? What will be the first noticeable change on that corner property?
Well, you're going to see that corner property get buttoned up quite a bit. So as we do the asbestos abatement and demolition, so you're going to see the windows covered and the area fenced off, and you're going to see a lot of activity. But most of it will be occurring inside. So we have some time before you'll start seeing the transformation outdoors. I think the time that I'm most excited to see is when we stabilize the building and we start building the fourth floor, rebuilding the missing fourth floor. That'll be really dramatic to see and will take some time, right? But eventually this building is going to look as though it won't look new, right? But it'll look the quality and it will look as it did when it was built to be a yeast manufacturing company a long time ago.
I'm curious for some of the folks who might be wondering or thinking a little bit about what home leasing is or what the company has done in the Finger Lakes. I know this is not the first project for you guys by any means. What are some other notable projects in this lane that you guys have taken on in, say, the last 5, 6, 7 years?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, home leasing is headquartered in Rochester. We're very active across New York from Albany to Buffalo, but in the kind of Finger Lakes, Rochester area, we've done a lot of historic buildings like this, as well as new construction. So we did the Holly High School in Holly, New York, which was vacant for 30 years. We did the Eastman Dental Dispensary on Main Street in Rochester, which was vacant for 20 or 30 years as well. And in new construction, we've done 2 projects in Farmington, which is probably our closest to Seneca Falls. And we've also been part of 4 projects that have been built on the former Inner Loop in downtown Rochester, which is a high-profile project as well.
All right. And my last question for you here, any sort of parting thoughts in terms of how the reception has been and how encouraging that is for you guys as you move into projects like this, when the community does get behind a development like this, which can be a lot for, using Seneca Falls as an example, a lot for people to wrap their brains around in terms of turning this structure that they've largely seen empty for the last, 20 to 30 years or look a certain way, to have this major transformation coming down the line.
Well, a project like this, when we first started out, invites some skepticism because it seems really hard, right? And really expensive, and it is. So I think the greatest thing that I was proud of for the local community is people had their minds open and sometimes even changed their minds, right? The seller of the building changed his mind, right? Instead of demolishing this building, he allowed for somebody to take a whack at saving it. And in terms of the town, there was some process of what are we doing here? Who are we? And people listened, and we listened to them. and created a project that I think everybody was excited about. And I think that was demonstrated by the award of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative funds, which are largely controlled locally. And just people worked on things well together. We didn't always agree, but when we disagreed, we listened and we tried to figure it out. And I was quite proud of the locals for setting that kind of table for us to work with.
Bret, appreciate the time. Thanks so much for taking it today.
Thank you. Have a good day.